Thank you so much. All right. Well, we have finished that series on Habakkuk with you all of the chapters, and now we're going to be talking about who we are, and that means who we are as a church. Now, some of the questions that you have gone through over the last couple of years has been these things. And last year, you folks came up with basically the vision or why we're about here. So we're going to be talking about is why are we here? What do we do, knowing that we are here for a certain reason? And then how do we know what things we're supposed to be doing? You know, last week, one of the things I brought up was I asked the question of the kids is, what was your favorite church memory? And so I asked Angel, and Angel and I were sitting down and figuring out what was our favorite church memory. We've had so many over the years. And so I had to think of it not as a one-time event, but rather something we do all the time, and that's baptism. There's nothing greater for me than to see kids, especially kids, baptized. And so that's one of my favorite memories of being in churches is that. You know, I was serving in a church in California as a Sunday school teacher. This was back in the early 90s when my wife and I owned a restaurant. And we were there in this little town of about 225 people. We had a Methodist church that we went to, and I don't remember which branch of the Methodist church it was, but obviously the pastor that was there, we had a difference of opinion on the Bible. He happened to be out of town one day, and he asked me if I would preach for him, and so I did. And then the very next week, he asked me to come to breakfast with him. So I went to breakfast with him, and he said, do you really believe all the stuff that's in the Bible? And I said, well, yeah. And he said, well, I said, there's some things that we just don't teach about and we don't preach in our church. I'm like, oh, really? And he goes, it might be good maybe if you just found a different church then, because I don't believe all that stuff. And I'm like, oh. So my question then was like, then why are you a pastor if you don't believe everything that's in this book? And he didn't really have a good answer for me, so I said, you know what, I think it's a good idea that maybe we do find ourselves in another church. We had to go down to another town about 12 miles away, although in the mountains, it was windy roads along the river, and it was not the safest place to go in the wintertime because we'd get 300 or 400 inches of snow a year, but that's where we ended up going was another town because we realized that was not the place for us. And so that's been the question that, what is the church all about? Why are we here? Why does God have us here? And we've been on a big journey for the last couple of years. Not just the pastoral search, but also even coming up with that whole vision statement that you guys came up with out of John chapter 14. I know there's been pain along the way, but also there's been joy. There's been a lot of hard work. Some of the members I've talked to that are on the pastoral search committee and those that have been on the board that just stepped down, they worked hard the last couple of years. And so they should be thanked a lot for all of their hard work. But during that time, clarity came to this church. There's been new direction, there's been new strength. And it is through that process that God has revealed why we are here today, what we are to do, and in this series we'll know what to say yes to and what to say no to. It's real easy as a church to do all kinds of stuff, but maybe there's only certain things that God wants us to do. And that's what this series is going to help us to get through and to teach us that. Yeah, that's actually off the internet. If you guys notice that, it's off of our webpage. And it actually was, I think it was an Easter service is what it was from a couple of years ago. So we're going to be studying out of John 14. So if you have your Bibles, go ahead and turn there, because that's where we're going to spend most of our time is right there in that chapter. The other week, was it last week or the week before, Seth came by. He is our classes representative for the Dakotas. He lives down in Sioux Falls. And he was telling me about some of the things that he was going through and how so few of our churches really have a vision of what they're about. And he was so grateful to see, I happened to have this up on my screen as we were talking. I was getting ready for the sermon. And he saw that and go, oh, I see that you're going to be talking about your church vision. I said, yeah, the church came up with a vision last year. And I said, this is what it was. Oh, I remember that. He said he remembered that process that you folks went through. He said, but so few churches today really know why they're here. They just have church on Sunday, and that's all they do. Whereas this church has come up with a very clear vision. Well, it's very similar to how the Gospels are done. So let's look at the Gospels real quickly. We have the 4 Gospels there. Each book is unique. If you've read each of those books, you know they're quite different. The same way each church is unique. We have 4 churches here in town. Each of them are very different. Each of them are unique and have their own character. There's rich stories in each of those books, but many of the stories are not the same in all the books. Some of the books mention certain stories and others do not, because it didn't fit what they're trying to do, trying to accomplish. They had different purposes, just in the same way we have different churches here in town and around this country. But there's one thing that's common amongst all those Gospels. There's one Christ. There's Jesus. He is the center of what it's all about. So what we did is we came up with this vision statement here. Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. This is up on our website. And if you go to the About Us, it's one of the first things it says, as was our church vision statement. And that's what it is. It says, this truth is what keeps us focused on why we serve Jesus. This is why we serve Jesus. Because he's the center of what we do as his church. He is the way, he is the truth, and he is the life. That's why we're here. It's because of Jesus. When people do not accept divine guidance, they run wild. But whoever obeys the law is joyful. You see, in many churches, and I've been in the big churches, you know that. Many of you know I've been in the very large churches. Sometimes it just becomes a business gimmick. They make this statement about who they are and what they do, and it just sounds more like a business statement about what they're doing. But you see, this church did something different. You see, many churches have this vision statement about, it's more about what they're going to do. This church started off by saying, no, this vision is based on who the person of Christ is. You guys went at a totally different approach than many other churches. Because you realize that the most important thing that we do as a church is to love our Savior and to follow him. You see, he is the way, he's the truth and the life. And when he was saying those, he was talking about himself. And when we do that, when we obey him, we can do it joyfully. So the Gospel of John, we're going to go over that real quickly. His vision was that you might believe. That was basically the Gospel of John is about you might believe. In John 1:1, he doesn't start, notice that he does not start with the birth of Christ. He doesn't talk about Jesus' birth at all. He talks about who Jesus is. He goes, he is the Word. He calls him the Word. He calls him God in the very beginning. And so each gospel was written for a very specific purpose. Matthew to the Jews, and so a lot of Jewish terminologies in that book. Mark written to the Romans, so it's full of a lot of action and just Jesus going here and doing there. It's like a man of action. And then there's Luke, who was a doctor, so he talks a lot about Jesus the man and all of his healings and all the stuff he does. And then John, he talks to the church. And so his major purpose is to write this gospel is so that they might believe. Now, this is what's important. We think sometimes that the Gospels were the first books written in the New Testament. They weren't. They're actually some of the latter ones. Most of the New Testament was written before the Gospels were. Because I think that there was some idea that they thought, well, Jesus coming back anytime now, there's no reason to write his story down. He's going to be back here real soon. And when 30 years had gone by and Jesus still had not returned, I thought, we better do something about this. We better write these stories down just in case that I die and I don't carry on the story. So Matthew, who was one of the disciples, he wrote down his. Then Mark, who was a friend of Peter, he wrote down the stories he got from Peter. Luke, who was traveling companion of Paul, who knew Mary, obviously, from the stories. And then John, of course, who was one of the disciples of Christ as well. And so they did this. And so the mission he wanted was, send me now so that we have this knowledge we can send out and go tell people about Jesus. Now, the next thing is the values. I'm not going to go over this real deeply because we're going to go over that in our third message. But the values basically is who we are as a church. Who we are based on the people that we have. Now, in John, you can figure that out by looking at a few things. So, actually, did I put it in here? No, I didn't put it in this one. But in here, you notice that the word know and believe are mentioned over 200 times together. So that's his purpose. He wants you to know, he wants you to believe in the Christ. He talks about the world, talks about truth, life, love, truth, again, truly, the Word. This is what was really important to him. These are the things that determine what his values were. And if you remember, if you know, he's called the Apostle of Love, and all of his books, especially 1st, 2nd, 3rd John, are filled with the word love all over. Well, the same is true here. It was very, very important to him. And so obviously that defined who John was. And so those things are the ones that really define what he did as a person. And those are things that we're going to discover as a church as well. Now, this is a typical business model that like I said, I was mentioning earlier. And a lot of times people set it up. So here's their core purpose, or what they call a vision, their mission. This is the people that are involved, and then this is their values. And we'll be doing something similar. When I was doing business plans for businesses and also for churches, I used to use a pyramid model. It's a very common model that's been used for more than 100 years. But as I was going through it, I realized that I had it wrong. Again, because I was looking at it from a business approach. So as I was actually doing the studies for this, I realized that my idea of vision was wrong. I kept going over and over again that what you had chosen as the vision statement for this church. And I realized a vision is not about what's going in the future, but a vision statement is about who we are really about. You know, our own family, Angel and I, we had 4 kids. We raised 4 children. And all the time that they were growing up, our vision statement of our family, I guess, was we serve. And we really, we serve in the community. The kids would help us to do things, and we'd go buy presents and do it secretly. We do Secret Santa stuff, and we just served in the community, and we coached, and we did all kinds of things. That's just who we were, and we taught that to our kids. We didn't realize how deep that was until about 2 or 3 years ago. Angel and I were talking one day, and I mentioned, it's like, yeah, you know, I think it really made a difference that we had that value statement as a family when they were so young that we served, because we started looking at what our kids do. Our oldest daughter is a paramedic. Our next oldest daughter, she teaches basically medical stuff at the physiology lab, anatomy lab in Springfield, Missouri, at the university there. Our son is a cop, and then our youngest one is a manager in a service industry in the phone business. All of our kids are in some form of service in where they're at. And so we realized that when we had that as a family, that's really what we're about. And so that's kind of the same thing with us as a church, who we are. So we're going to talk about John chapter 14. So let's look at where this is happening. Now, John chapter 14, you realize that there's, more than 20 chapters in this, and you're thinking, okay, there's probably somewhere in the middle of Jesus' ministry. No, actually, this is right at the very last week of his life. A huge part of John is spent just on that last week of Jesus' life. And in chapter 14, they're up in the upper room, and what is going on outside? The people are about ready to have the Passover, and Jesus has been teaching all week, and during that week, it started off really good. Sunday, what a great day. He's coming in, Palm Sunday, everyone's excited, and they're calling him, the Lord, and they're hoping that he's going to come in and just take over Rome, and they were excited, but then on Monday he comes in and he doesn't do anything. He starts teaching. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Tuesday comes in, does more. He makes mention of some lady giving money, 2 little mites, and he makes a big deal of that. And they're like, come on, Jesus, come on, be king, come on, get up there, get rid of that nasty Romans. Wednesday, he does nothing. He doesn't do a single thing on Wednesday. He was off somewhere with the disciples, maybe they were just eating or whatever, but they didn't do anything on Wednesday. He didn't do any teaching, he didn't even show up in the temple, nothing. Thursday, this day here, they're preparing for a meal, for the Passover meal. And so the disciples are like a little concerned, like, what's going on here? I thought he was going to call himself king. So here they are, and now they're in this room, this upper room. Probably not very big. And it's almost like they're hiding away, like they're a little scared. And then Jesus starts talking about him dying. I don't know about you, but, things that are going on outside, and all of a sudden he starts talking about dying, and he's supposed to be becoming the king. I'm a little confused right now. And I think these guys were. So, obviously, they therefore have a ton of questions. So this set actually doesn't even start in chapter 14. It actually starts in chapter 13. And the Q&A session actually starts in verse 31, but I want you to notice something. He says something there very, very important that a lot of times people miss. He says, when he had gone out, Jesus said, and he starts teaching the disciples, the he was Judas. Judas had just gone to Jesus, and Jesus says, okay, go do what you need to do. So Judas is going out. So right now, while Jesus is giving these instructions, Judas is on his way to go see the priests to tell them where Jesus is going to be in just a matter of a couple hours so they can arrest him and crucify him. So he waits, Jesus waits until Judas leaves, and then he starts teaching him about himself. And he reveals more about himself now than he ever does throughout the rest of the book. So it's really important to find out what he's talking about. So he starts his conversation. Jesus is the one that starts the conversation, starts revealing who he is, starts talking about what he's doing, and then Peter, old impetuous Peter, he decides to ask a question. Right in the middle of Jesus talking. You can probably see him, like the kid at school, like, teacher, 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 was asking the question. Well, that's kind of the situation here. Jesus, now, that's very important because he's going to get interrupted 4 times in his speech. And so he's talking to the disciples, and Peter says, Jesus, where are you going? And Jesus says, where I'm going, you cannot come. And Peter's like, I've been with you for 3 years. I want to come with you. What do you mean I can't go with you? So Jesus asked a very difficult question. He goes, where I go, you cannot come. Are you willing to lay your life down for me? And what do you think Peter says? Well, yeah, I'll die for you, Jesus. I'll take up the sword. I'm ready to go. I'm ready to conquer the world with you. Let's go. Let's take over this kingdom and let's do it. I'm ready to die with you if that's what it takes. And then this is where Jesus makes his prediction about Peter. He said, Peter, before this day is over, you're going to deny me 3 times. Awkward. You've just been corrected in front of all of your friends. You're just told that you're going to deny Jesus in front of all your friends. And Jesus says that to you? That's one of those cringe-worthy moments, So here's Peter. He is like, all of a sudden, he's told this by Jesus, like, he has no answer. So Jesus continues talking. That's where we catch up in chapter 14, verse 1. Now remember, Peter had interrupted Jesus with this question about where Jesus was going. And so Jesus answers his question and continues with his original intent. Jesus knows that they are troubled, so he tells them not to worry. He says this, he says, let not your heart be troubled. We believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you. I go to prepare a place for you, and if I go to prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you to myself. And where I am, there you may be also. And where I go, you know, and the way you know. By the way, Echo, what was the version that you used? The New Living? Okay. Very good, because I'm going to make a mention about that in a second here. He says he's explained to them they shouldn't be troubled. He is going someplace. He's going to be glorified. His death is part of the whole plan. So they know he's going away, and he tells them he's going away to do something. Now, in my translation, I use the word mansions. And sometimes we get this idea that, man, Jesus is going to heaven. He's building up these big mansions. I'm going to have this big old house on the hill. It's going to have like 15 rooms, 6 bathrooms and pool table. I mean, we have this idea of this giant mansion. Well, that's nice thinking, but that's not really what the word says. It's actually closer to what it says in the New Living Translation where it talks, I'm creating a dwelling place for you. See, the picture he's trying to picture is one of a Roman house. Now, in the Roman house, they had a very large house with a courtyard. And when a son got married, they would build on another section to the original house. So as the family grew, the house grew bigger. The idea, the picture that Jesus is trying to paint here is that I'm going to prepare a place because I'm expanding the kingdom and I'm adding you onto it. I'm adding dwelling places for you to be part of. The reality is it's not about these mansions of luxury, but rather it's a place where he's going to be and we're going to be with him. That's the picture he's trying to create here. Not that we're going to be in splendor, although, we're going to be in heaven. That's pretty luxurious itself. But the reality is he's not trying to picture this place that we're going to have our own little dwelling and we're going to be off by ourselves. That is not why he created us. In Genesis chapter 1, he says that he created them and they were one. Man and woman were one, and they spent time with him. They dwelt with him, and they walked together in the garden. That was the original intent. In my own mind, I'm thinking, yippee! He's going up there to make me a mansion. I'm excited. Let's go. I'm going to go up there. And so I'm saying, Lord, come quickly. And so I can go to heaven and go to this mansion of mine. But obviously he's saying, no. It's not about this place. And that's sometimes where we get it mixed up. We all look forward to heaven. We've had a number of our members who have passed away over the last year, and they're in heaven now. But see, heaven is not a place that we need to be concerned about a dwelling place in the way of big mansions and all that sort of stuff. The most important part of heaven is we're going to be dwelling with Christ. And that's why it says he is the way, the truth, and the life. It's not a process. And that's what the disciples are having a problem with. Is, what do you mean, what is the way? Like, they're thinking there's like some physical way to get there. And so then Thomas asks the next question. So he's saying, okay, so this is what Jesus, last thing Jesus says. He says, and where I go you know, and you know the way. So Thomas says, wait, okay, Lord, we do not know where you are going, and how can we know the way? Thomas is, again, remember, he's interrupting what Jesus is revealing about himself. And Jesus says, I am the way. So Thomas is a little pessimistic. He's like, oh, Jesus, we really don't know where you're going. we thought you were going to be taking over the kingdom. We thought you were going to be getting rid of these Romans. We thought you were going to take control. We don't know where you're going. And he says, now listen, I am the way. Means he's the idea behind this is he's the only way to the Father. You can't be a Buddhist and get to heaven. You can't be a Hindu and get to heaven. There's only one way. Jesus, the living Christ. The one in just a few hours is going to give up his life for his people. Die, be buried, 3 days later be raised from the dead. He's the only one who can do that. He is the way. There's no other way. It's not a path that we take. It's not an effort that we do. It's a believing in him only. He is the truth, the knowledge of the Father. He says, if you know me, you already know the Father. You don't need to be going looking for the Father. You already know him because you know me. And lastly, he's the life that only he can give. Now it's interesting, he mentions the word truth 27 times in this book. Therefore, it's important to him. He mentions the word life 44 times. So again, it's really important what he's talking about. The statement falls in direct opposition to the rejection that is happening on the outside. Remember, where is Judas? He has rejected Christ. That's why he was not part of this teaching from Jesus. He's rejected Christ. He's on his way to go get some soldiers. They're going to come and get Jesus, arrest him in the garden, and then they're going to take him back and try him in court. And so the rest of the world at this point, has rejected Christ. Only the people that are in this room have accepted him, have made any sort of profession of faith for him. So Jesus is talking only to these 11. He's not talking to the whole world. He's talking to them to emphasize who he is and why he's there. To remind them of what he's doing. And to prepare them about what's ready to happen. This last session that we just covered, we talked about Habakkuk and all the sin that was going on and all the evil, and we're like, there's like no way to go over it, but somehow God still uses it. He used it with the Babylonians, and just a matter of a few hours, he's going to use the Romans to perform God's will. You see, the Jews didn't have the right to kill Jesus. They didn't have the authority to do it. They needed the Romans to do that. And the Jews, if someone has done something wrong in the Jewish tradition, what happened to them? How did they die? They died by stoning, right? Jesus didn't die by stoning. He died one of the most cruelest deaths of all, the death on the cross. In verse 7 it says, if you had known me, you would have known my Father also, and from now on you will know him and have seen him. You see, the Jews, they were looking for a physical representation like Moses had. They thought, we're going to see God like Moses did, out there in the wilderness. We're going to see him just like that. That's not what it's about. So then Philip, he asked a question. So he's like, wait. Okay, Jesus, hang on. Let me ask this question here. Lord, show us the Father, it is sufficient for us. It's like, guys, I mean, how many here are teachers or have taught Sunday school or whatever? Raise your hand if you've been ever a teacher. Okay. Have you ever had that time where the kids are asking questions and it's like they ask the same question in 6 different ways, but it's still the same question?
Still the same.
Please, I already answered this question for you. But Jesus, he just goes ahead and answers it anyways. He and the Father are one. You don't need to have a physical representation of the Father. You have it right now in the person of Jesus Christ. They are one. Now, of course, Philip, he's ignorant. He doesn't always know the truth. He's a little dense, but he's determined to find out. He's trying to find out what is truly going on. He's trying to know the truth. In a way, Jesus does kind of scold him because he says almost the exact same thing he said just a couple verses before. But then he says, if you don't believe it, that's why I love what you said in your version. If you don't believe it, believe what I did. Remember when John's disciples came to Jesus, they did the same thing. He says, how do we know that you are the Christ? And Jesus doesn't say, well, because I'm in the Father. No, he says, believe the things that I've done. Cast out demons, heal people. And so that's what he's saying here. Believe me because of what I've done. Not just my words, but what I've done. Well, I know this goes beyond it, but then there's another question that's asked. So again, Jesus goes back to start teaching again. He goes, most assuredly I say to you, he who believes in me, the works that I will do also. He starts talking about all the greater things that we're going to do because there's more of us and so forth. And that's not the purpose of this message. We'll get to that later on. But then Judas, the other Judas, and it's very, if you see that in the scriptures, in verse, let's see here, 22, I believe. Judas, not Iscariot. John wanted to be very clear. Hey, this is Judas, the other Judas. Not the betrayer, but the other Judas. He now asks the question, Lord, how is it that you will manifest yourself to us and not to the world? So he's kind of being a little selfish, like, Jesus, you're our guy. And he says, no, that's not what it's about, Judas. I'm here because of everybody. And the Holy Spirit's going to come, and he's going to be the one. So we had these 4 guys asking these 4 questions, actually 5 questions. Peter asked 2 questions. You know how Peter is, usually that's a question. So which one of the disciples would have you been? Would you have been Peter, the impetuous one, or would you have been Philip, who was, his own questions? To me, I probably would have been Peter. In fact, if you look at my grade card when I was growing up as a kid, it says Brian was a good student, but... and then it was like paragraphs. He talks too much. He's always running around. I'm pretty sure that was the first kid that had ADHD. And, although I'm not so sure about that. But I was probably like Peter, I'd be the first to speak. First to ask the question after question after question. And then I'd probably go away with my feelings hurt. Just like Peter did. You see, Jesus wanted to be very clear to the disciples who he was and what was going to happen in the next few minutes. He had to make sure that they were solid. That's why he said what he said to them. He says, we are one. The Father and I are one. I am coming. I am going away to go do something very important. I will come back. And he says, if you ask in my name, it will happen. And so, here's where we are as a church. So we've identified the way, the truth, and the life. That's who we are. That's our vision. We're here because of Jesus Christ. Next week, we're going to talk about our mission. And we talked about it in Habakkuk. To go, to love, the disciple, and then to worship. But we're going to talk about what does that mean, though. But then the last task we have, and this is going to be a lot of hard work that I'll be going with a number of people and our leadership team, is what are our values? I didn't put them in here yet because I don't fully know what they are yet. I have a pretty good guess at what our values are at this church, but not quite yet. So that's what we're going to discover over the next few weeks. So what is vision? Vision is not about what we do or who we are. It's about him and what he does. It unites us as a church. It compels us to action. It gives us hope. And it expands his kingdom, not ours. I mean, I'd love to have this church completely full of people. And I think one day it's going to be full of people. But that's not the reason why we're a church. Why are we a church? Because we believe Jesus is the answer. That's the vision that we have. That's the vision that God gave us. You see, it's all because of Jesus. That's why we're here. The way to the Father lies in the knowledge of Jesus Christ, and the truth about him and the experience of his life, and his death, and his resurrection. I'll leave with this little quote here. Bernard C. Tenney is a famous scholar. He says, Christianity is not a system or philosophy, nor a ritual, nor a code of laws. It is the impartation of a divine vitality. Without the way, there is no going. Without the truth, there is no knowing. Without life, there is no living. We are here as a church because we believe that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. And there's no way to get there, to heaven, to be with the Father, except through him. That's why we're here. That's our vision. That's who we are. It's not about a future. It's about who he is. There's a lot of people who have vision plans, churches and businesses, tell them where they need to go. Our main emphasis has to be, why are we here and who do we worship? Father, we just thank you so much for this time together. We worship you. We love you. We give you glory. We're so grateful to you that you are the center of who we are as a church. You have placed the right people at the right time, and you are moving forward and doing a lot in this church. But the biggest thing that you did was to reveal to us who you are as a person. And we are so grateful for that. We so look forward to serving you, to leading more people to know you like we love you, and we're hoping that you'll see this church and this community continue to grow and see your kingdom expand. We love you with all of our heart. Amen. We can all stand, please. We're going to say the